Yes, he's working on getting us
Okay.
up online. If you want to just wait just a moment. There's Mr. Burke as well.
All right, we just got it.
All right, there's a thing that's popped up here, I didn't know if that mattered. So now to vote on approval of the amended agenda. Moved by Mr. Reagan, second by Mr. Akers, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So up first then, based on the feasibility of the Senate Bill S4378A, the Pollution Justice Act of 2021, I will have Mr. Walter Rilling take the podium and present.
Good evening, everyone.
Copy of it.
Does everyone have a copy of the bullet points?
Yes.
Quick bit about my background. I've been in the power generation business, burning natural gas since 1989. Power plants, Long Island, and here in the North Country. These plants were cogeneration plants. Anybody knows what a cogeneration plant is? It's designed to provide thermal energy to a steam host, which would be a paper mill, or Alcoa, or Grumman Aerospace, or mostly paper mills in the North Country. And there's many of these facilities. They were all shut down in 1998, shut down in terms of having a contract to sell electricity to the utility. 1999, the New York ISO, New York Independent System Operator, stood up and began to administer a deregulated wholesale energy market. And they're still operating today. So they've got over 20 years now doing their thing. So I had this bill brought to my attention, I don't know, 6, 8, 9 months ago. And kind of piqued my interest. So I read it pretty thoroughly, and I found out the facilities that are affected by this. And the way the bill was written and the way these facilities, is about 50 of them, were selected was based on their capacity factor. Capacity factor is the usage of the plant. So if the plant can make 50 megawatts, if it ran 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, that would be 100% capacity factor. So obviously at less than 15%, which is the criteria that they use for this list, these plants don't run very often. They're designated peaking plants, right? And the name is pretty plain. That means they come online when they're needed to meet an excessive demand, a larger demand. So the bill sponsors are from New York City and Long Island, and I mentioned that they're the two areas that can least afford shortages in energy.
I put that up on the board.
Oh, okay. The New York ISO, yes. I put the links on this pages that I gave you guys. So you can see where I get the information from. But the New York ISO is a very good website. It's very transparent. You can learn an awful lot about the way the energy market works in New York, including they have a thing called the real-time dashboard that'll show you actually the fuel, the different energy sources on a pie chart. Typically, natural gas is providing about 50% or greater of the overall energy needs of the state. When we get into the high load times, very cold days, very hot days, it can be 65%. So natural gas is providing the lion's share of the energy in New York State. the faucet, the bill requires that, plants powered with natural gas or fossil fuels, need to be repowered with renewable energy sources. Renewable energy sources are listed, on your sheets there, but it's basically wind and solar and batteries. So I call this the feasibility of this act because in order to replace a fossil plant that sits on an acre or two of land, that makes, we'll just use 50 megawatts as a good baseline, right? Because that's what most of the plants upstate were built, 50 megawatt range, these cogeneration plants. So we'll just use 50 megawatts. In order to put 50 megawatts of solar up, you need, 5 to 10 acres per megawatt of solar. For wind, you need 2 to 40 acres per megawatt. So you do the arithmetic on that. Say a solar plant, 50 megawatts. You need, we'll say 5 acres. You need 250 acres of land. These plants they were plopped down on these postage stamp size pieces of property. So the feasibility of an owner of one of these things being able to actually implement this repowering is nil. It's really nil. The sponsors, again, New York City, Long Island, they have respectively 630 megawatts in New York City, 12 power plants, and in Long Island, 32 power plants, representing 1,750 megawatts of peaking power. I would venture to say that none of those plants could conceivably be replaced with renewable. Batteries maybe would be feasible if you wanted to just pack a whole bunch of batteries into this little chunk of land. And by the way, the reason why it's important that for people to understand is the connection to the grid is local to the plant. So if you want to say, oh, well, just build the solar plant out somewhere else, well, there's no infrastructure to connect to the grid there. So it becomes a much more costly endeavor. Right? The infrastructure to connect to the grid now is at the plant. So that's the only feasible place to do this repower. So batteries, it's kind of plain on its face that solar and wind are not the answer as far as repowering. Batteries, they're very nice in theory, but I pointed out the largest battery storage facility in the world. It's under battery over here. It was built and designed by Burns and McDonald, and it's out in California. So it's 400 megawatts, and it's capable of producing 1,600 megawatt hours. So what does that mean? That means it can do 400 megawatts for 4 hours, and then it's done. Can't make any more electricity. Can't provide any more electricity to the grid. Has to be recharged. Typically, when these peaking plants get called into service, and they get called into service by the New York ISO to maintain reliability, to maintain the generation to be in equilibrium with the demand. That's the way electricity works, the way the grid works. You have to generate it as you use it. New York ISO's job to manage that. So if you have a plant that's making 50 megawatts and you turn it on in an hour, 2 hours, it can run indefinitely. Battery storage is 4 hours. Everybody knows that nighttime is longer than 4 hours. So you're not gonna make it up with solar at night. And the battery concept is a good concept for very short-term additions to the grid. But anything beyond 4 hours is just not there. One of the reasons why I think this bill is really kind of pointless is the New York ISO, let's just say, the owners of these plants say we can't do it. We can't do power. So the New York ISO, we have to retire, because that's what the bill says. If you can't do it, you gotta retire. The New York ISO has to approve retirements, okay, because they have responsibility for the reliability of the grid. So the chances of the New York ISO saying, sure, you can take 1,700 megawatts out from Long Island, and we're not going to replace it. Or you can take 650 megawatts away from New York City peaking plants. It's not going to happen. The New York ISO is not going to compromise the reliability of the grid, not going to compromise the reliability of Long Island's power supply. So the plants that are targeted mostly by this, because of the location of the politicians that wrote it, is New York City and Long Island, and they can least afford the loss of the electricity, and they have the least possibility of feasibly doing a renewable replacement. So I quote some statistics in here. Another one that's very important, if you get a chance to look, if somebody would go to if you can go to the markets and then to the real-time dashboard on that screen, you'll see that the New York ISO has a piece of the pie that says natural gas. You got to feel down a little bit. So the price of electricity is very high right now. But you see the dual fuel piece and then the natural gas piece. I'll tell you that the dual fuel piece is burning natural gas, okay? So your dual fuel, that means you're going to be natural gas and oil as a backup. It's very important. And it's one of the reasons why the New York ISO is so interested in making sure people see that there's dual fuel capability. Because if you lose natural gas supply, that can happen from, you can have failures of the electrical grid that can make that happen. You can have natural disasters that could affect that. You could just have really, really cold temperatures where the firm supply going to hospitals and homes takes precedence, and those that don't have firm supply get cut off. And that's when those plants would revert to their secondary fuel source, which would be liquid fuel, right? Fuel oil. So of the 150 units in New York State that are dual fuel, 34 of them are on this list. So that's another reason why the New York ISO is going to be very reticent to remove these units from the system, because they are banking on those plants to come online in the event that there's an interruption of natural gas. These plants operate about 2% of the year. So the argument that they are polluting the air heavily and causing all sorts of harm to people is kind of empty. 2% is a very small amount of time. But that 2% is very important. It's what keeps the lights on for that 2% of the time when they would otherwise start to go dim, start to have brownouts, start to have rolling blackouts. The other thing about this legislation that to me is almost ludicrous is you have these peaking plants to meet this high demand. And one of the prime functions of these peaking plants is to meet the high demand when the existing renewables are unable to meet demand. Okay, so it's a cloudy, 100% humidity, 95 degrees summer day. And it's not blowing, and the wind is not blowing, right? It's a frigid winter day. The wind is not blowing. I actually made mention of it in here. Just at the beginning of January, the wind energy on that pie chart, on the first cold day we had, I wrote the date down here, January 2nd, there was zero wind energy being produced in New York State. Now, it was dead calm and it was dead cold. And the load was very high because people turn on, farmers particularly, and those that put on their electric heat to supplement, right? So the price of energy that day got very high. And so the concept of backing up renewables with peaking plants is a good one. Backing up renewables with other renewables, not such a good idea, because if the wind isn't blowing and you need somebody to make up the difference, that somebody is a windmill, is a wind turbine, the wind's not blowing for them either. So these are the basics of why this act, in my view, with my 30 plus years of experience in this business, and having been experienced in the New York ISO's operations since the New York ISO became the New York ISO, I'm pretty knowledgeable about how the system works. So I guess I could just let you know that there's websites on here to show you where I got the information. Solar site, wind site. These are folks that want to build these things. So it's not folks that are saying, oh, we don't want this. It's the ones who want to build it. So it's going to be pro renewable, these websites, and they're quoting facts about land use, how much land you need. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to field them.
Mr. Akers?
So the New York ISO, they operate independently. Who approves the members or who do they answer to?
On the Public Service Commission. Okay. Basically, the New York ISO used to be the New York Power Pool. Right, so they were always located over there in near Albany and Rensselaer. And their primary function before 1999, which is when they stood up, was reliability. When they stood up as a New York ISO, happened at the same time as deregulation. So they began to administer the market, the wholesale market. I explained how the wholesale market works to Rita, and it's a little complicated, but if you're interested, I can tell you briefly.
But I'm just wondering what insulates them from public pressure or political pressure? I mean, how are they able to operate independently? Like the Power Authority is kind of a quasi-private, non-public, but the governor appoints all the members. So is the IOS?
Well, the ISO is a not-for-profit organization.
Okay.
If that's what you're getting at.
Well, how do you become a member? I mean, who determines your membership? Are you voted in by who, or you are appointed? I mean, for example, the Governor Cuomo said that by decree that basically by the year 2030, that 50% of our energy comes from renewable sources. So it sounds like the ISO.
Zero emissions.
Zero
He
emissions.
changed it when he realized that the nuclear plants were coming offline in Oswego, and it was going to take a big bite out of his plan. So he changed it to zero emissions.
Okay, so that's still solar and wind. So the ISO will have some type of sway in that decision, or they can't meet that goal then.
Oh, absolutely. The ISO is really, again, they're responsible for the reliability of the system. That's their primary function.
Right. So I guess for us as a body, how can we protect the independence of the ISO? I mean, is there anything that St. Lawrence County Board of Legislators can do to support that? We could obviously have a resolution against this particular bill itself. Is there an accompanying bill in the assembly now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I mean, but I'm just talking about what I know, and why I think this isn't feasible. And why I don't think it's gonna pass muster, because again, the target is New York City and Long Island, and the feasibility of replacing it with these plants.
Well, the other thing was the previous governor did stop the pipeline from going across to underneath over to Long Island.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then he went after National Grid so National Grid to actually stop doing the installations for natural gas residential hookups.
Right.
So then the governor said, well, we'll bring it by barge or we'll truck it in, which was total antithesis of what the environmentalists want. So now National Grid got hit with an $18 million fine, and they said it won't show up in our rates.
Well, there's a lot of people that think this is all magic, right? The governor was one of, well, why can't you? Well, it's a matter of physics, right? I talk to people that run the gas system. When I'm running a plant, I have to contact the gas supplier, and I have to contact National Grid. You can only run the pressure up in a pipe so high. And once then they have safeties on it, right? Because the pipe can only take so much pressure. So you can only flow so much gas through a pipe. So when they say they have a moratorium on adding new customers, it's not because they're trying to get over on somebody. They physically can't deliver the fuel, When you talk about pipelines, and I know a little bit about this too, there's a lot of people in New England that are not very happy with New York, because Governor Cuomo stopped some cross-state pipelines from going in, which were going to deliver inexpensive gas from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, shale gas over to New England. So, and also an additional supply. So not just a cost thing, but a supply thing. New England ISO has already issued warnings of rolling blackouts this winter if there's sustained cold. So they're talking about if you have 3 or 4 days of say, sub 10 temperatures, they may have to start turning people off. So this is serious. This is serious business.
I agree.
So the pipeline thing, yes, sir.
I just a comment, if this were to happen, it would have a huge negative effect on so many communities around the state. These cogen plants are valued at $30 to $50 million or more apiece. And when you take that off the tax rolls in these communities, you're pretty much creating a tax increase for all the residents of the communities that lose these
Right.
cogen plants. Plus, the whole point of a cogen plant, I can remember back when they were first being built, is they were also providing a heating source to hospitals, to various institutions, and taking them offline is going to create huge problems for the businesses and institutions that rely on the low-cost steam heat that many of them generate in addition to the electricity. So, there's a triple whammy effect, all of which is negative by anything that endangers these cogen plants.
Well, they're certainly generating tax revenue for the localities. It should be noted, though, that since those contracts were terminated in 1998, there was a thing called the Master Restructuring Agreement. National Grid particularly complained that these plants were going to put it into bankruptcy. And so those contracts were all put in shredder. And like I used to euphemistically like to say that NIMO showed up with a dump truck full of money and gave everybody a whole bunch of money, and they turned off their plants. So the value of these plants has been greatly diminished.
But they're still,
They're still paying
in
taxes.
many communities, they are the biggest property taxpayer in that community.
You know,
So
I know that we're paying taxes, so.
it is, it is not a small matter to, many smaller communities that have cogens in their midst to lose them.
Well, I mentioned in my bullet points, the people that wrote this bill, they obviously don't know anything about peaking plants outside of their location, right? And they put it under this umbrella of 15% capacity factor or less. Well, there's plants like that all over New York State, from Buffalo to Albany to Plattsburgh. They're all over the place. And they were built, just a little bit of color on what you were saying, when they first were built, they were built actually as a result of an act that Jimmy Carter's administration put in during the oil embargo, which enabled developers to build plants that would have had to have been built by the utility based on their projections for load growth. And they call that avoided costs. And they had to meet certain criteria, which was efficiency criteria. They're very efficient plants. They're very clean plants too, which is another, carbon dioxide is just kind of recently become a pollutant, but these plants were all built with state-of-the-art pollution controls when they were put in. Or better than state-of-the-art. There was best available and reasonably available technology, and some of the facilities went with best. They spent the money to put in the best available so that they could keep those plants running as these regulations changed in terms of pollutants. So that's kind of an empty argument also about the pollution, unless you want to talk about CO2, when they do. And if you burn something, you're going to make CO2. I mean, you can't avoid that. So.
Okay. Mr. Forsythe had his hand up next, I believe, and then Ms. Hager.
Thank you. Where does nuclear fit into all this? I see that location 4 was closed in April, it looks like, of 2021. Where does nuclear fit into this whole plan at all?
I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because even though I'm not a nuclear engineer, and I never worked in a nuke plant, my opinion, my personal opinion, is that the country needs to start building nuke plants, and lots of them, yesterday.
Yep.
China has 44 nuke plants coming online by 2030. India has 24 coming online by 2030. The United States has 3. We have 100 nuclear power plants in this country right now that account for 20% of all the generation in the United States. Most of them are 70s vintage. Many of them are applying to be relicensed to run for 100 years, right? 50 more years onto their existing 50-year licenses. Personally, I think that's a very risky idea. The plants were designed to run for 50 years. They're nuclear power plants. Bad things can happen when nuclear power plants have problems. So, in my view, the country is way behind. If we want to have a zero emissions future, we absolutely have to start replacing the old nuclear plants, and we need to start building a whole bunch of new ones. And there's a lot of really great technology out there now. Bill Gates is building one, by the way, in Montana, called Terra Power. It's called. So he knows that we need new plants, and he's a pretty smart guy.
And the footprint that goes along with them it's much less than any of these solar facilities or wind facilities. And I know the siting of them is going to be a nightmare, but I think long-term, I think that's the only key. But
They're designing them much smaller now, so you can put kind of almost like modular nuclear plants on the ground. You can get them erected much faster, but it needs to start happening, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Next was Mrs. Haggard.
Thank you, Ms. Chairperson. Sir, I think I understood this correctly. With the dual fuel, how often does natural gas get interrupted and what percentage of the time does that happen when you have to switch to the other fuel?
Well, it has to do with weather mainly. I pointed out there certainly there's always a potential for a calamity, right? A natural disaster, earthquake. And we do have earthquakes up here, you break a pipe and you have to shut things off. But it's mostly to do with the capacity of the existing pipelines, right? So the way it works is if you have a hospital, you're an LDC, a local distribution company, like St. Lawrence Gas, right? They have to supply natural gas to their firm customers. That's the homeowners, that's the businesses, that's the hospitals and so forth. When you have sustained cold, that load grows. There's more load on that pipeline, okay? And as I said before, you can only put so much pressure into a pipe, right? So you have to start to curtail folks that don't have firm capacity. That's why these cogen plants were built with dual fuel capability, because they made contracts to bring the gas in, and they made contracts with St. Lawrence Gas, with National Grid, to say, okay, we're gonna bring this gas in every day, but if you ever need it, we'll switch over to liquid fuel to tide you over, so to speak, until this really bad cold snap goes by. And then, then once the system, so that we just got this today, right now, it's called an operational flow order, an OFO. It's happening right now and until tomorrow, until 10 o'clock in the morning. If you don't have firm gas, you don't have a contract for firm gas, you're cut off. You can't burn gas. So that's the reason why it's so important to have dual fuel capability. And
So
it's
it happens just with weather fluctuation? Is that during both seasons? I mean, I'm trying to get an idea of how often we have to go to liquid gas.
Yeah, it's weather driven. In 2014, remember we had the polar vortex? Remember that thing that it was all in the news, the polar vortex? Gas was being turned off everywhere to power plants. It was a mad scramble. The price of natural gas went to, for reference, a kind of a normal price for natural gas is about $3 a unit, $3 a decatherm or a million BTUs. It was $100. Today it's $25 because of this little cold snap we're in right now. It's $25. So that kind of tells you, and it's not a function of the supply of the gas coming out of the wells. It's a function of the ability to transport the amount of gas that you need. Because the pipes are only so big and you can only pass so much gas through the pipes.
Thank you.
Okay, last but not least was Mr. Lightfoot had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The question I had was, and it's a short one, what's the distribution throughout the state of these peaker plants? Metropolitan New York vis-a-vis the rest of the state.
Well, there's 50 plants on the list. 50 plants on the list that this legislation affects. 32 of them are on Long Island. 12 of them are in New York City. So the plants upstate are, a dozen or so.
Okay, so if I may, and I'll be brief, if those do come offline, don't produce, what are we looking at as far as megawattage having to replace that? And ancillary to that, where does that power come from if it doesn't come from Northern New York?
Okay, so the plants that are in upstate New York, quite frankly, probably would be allowed by the New York ISO to shut down. If they said we can't convert to renewable, it's not feasible for us, we don't have the land, we don't have the money, we don't have whatever it is that we don't have, they would probably be allowed because there's an abundance of electricity generation in upstate New York. It comes from nuke plants, it comes from Hydro-Quebec, it comes from, there are many natural gas fired plants that run 24 hours a day. Particularly some of the plants that took the place of Indian Point. The Indian Point nukes came off, they had to replace those. They brought on some large 700, 800 megawatt plants burning natural gas in that neck of the woods. So the energy that would be lost upstate, frankly, could easily be replaced. It's the downstate plants that I kind of focus on when I talk about this, because the people that are making this legislation, they're focused on these plants and they have their reasons why they think they should be shut down, which I've already explained is not feasible, but they've cast this net over the whole state. So these plants that generate tax revenue, that are providing a service in a community, they're providing some jobs, not a lot of jobs anymore, but some jobs, and tax revenue will get swept up into this, and they'll go out of business. They're not really going to have much of a choice.
So what you're saying though is that the upstate plants will likely be the ones that close. Does that mean that the ones in the metropolitan area will remain operational?
That's my opinion. I mean, there may be a select few that could, that the New York ISO could say, okay, we can do without them. But when I point out in Long Island in particular, say 1,700 megawatts, 32 plants, 1,700 megawatts. Long Island's load on a hot summer day is 3,500 megawatts. That's half, right? So, and they're talking about putting, I think 2,700 megawatts worth of offshore wind off Long Island. That's great. Until the wind is not blowing, right? So if you take these 1,700 megawatts out of service on Long Island, because it's not feasible for them to be replaced, and you say, well, don't worry about it, we're gonna have 2,700 megawatts of offshore wind. When the wind's not blowing, Long Island's gonna have a big problem. So.
Harry,
Yeah,
you have a question?
evidenced by California And it seems a little short-sighted of 3 senators from the metropolitan area, all of them, to come up with this kind of a brainstorm and have it affect areas that they've probably never been in before. And I certainly would not be voting in favor of any resolution that espouses this kind of activity. So thank you for your presentation.
You're right. If I could put one more little point on it as far as the people. When you have power shortages, and California is the poster child. Okay? They're having power shortages all the time because of their policies there. But if you're a person who is of means, a person of means, you can put a whole house generator. You see them around in the North Country all the time. You can put a whole house generator at your house, hook it up to natural gas, and if the power goes out, you've got power. You can't do that if you live in a 20-story apartment building in the Bronx. You know, you don't have that option. So the folks that are ill prepared to deal with power shortages are the ones that are going to have to deal with power shortages. So if you're talking about social justice, you know, it's 95 degrees and you don't have your electricity and you can't air condition, that can cause a lot of discomfort and can cause illness. And in the winter, even worse.
Walter, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
All right. So moving on.
It's nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have to go back and approve the minutes for November 8th and December 13th. By Mr. Denisha, Mr. Reagan, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on. Next up, I have planning with Jason Fultonhour. I have a resolution authorizing the chair to sign a contract with New York State Office of Community Renewal for the Community Development Block Grant Fund and modifying the 2022 budget for the planning office. Jason, there you go. Go ahead.
We need a motion.
Sorry. By Mr. Perkins, seconded by Mr. Denisha. And Jason's gonna talk about it.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, all. This is a standard resolution that we put forward to you when we receive a grant. We have been awarded $615,000 from the Office of Community Renewal to continue our housing rehabilitation work that has been done for many years in the county, by the county. And we are looking to have this resolution passed, so it authorizes the chair to sign the contract with the state to move things along. It also sets up accounts in the planning office in the county's budget to receive and disperse funds that come in and out for this grant. And then the last little bit, the language there allows us to roll these accounts over from year to year if it's not completed in one calendar year. So happy to answer any questions about this resolution or the program.
Mr. Akers.
Jason, thank you. It looks like that there's 12 houses that are eligible. I thought the limits were 15,000 per house expenditures. This would be 50.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure of the 15,000 number. I know for a different program, our lead program, the max award that is designated by HUD is 20,000. We are able to work around that. Costs, unfortunately, are just going up and up and up, and works out to about 40,000 per unit, and that's based. We generate these numbers from past work. It does. I agree. It does seem high, but unfortunately, that's just the cost. The costs that we're dealing with right now.
And administratively, how much of this cost will you guys take a piece of this?
It's the max administration that's allowable through this program is 18%.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it carries.
Thank you all. Bye now.
So next up, I have Gary Pasquar, District Attorney. I have a resolution authorizing the chair to sign a federal equitable sharing program agreement and annual certification report, moved by Mr. Perkins, seconded by Mr. Denisha. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. So this is a yearly request that we make. It's standard. It's a certification and a report that I file with the Department of Justice so that we can continue to get forfeiture monies from some of our federal law enforcement partners. I let them know how much we've taken in, how much we spend, who does our audit for the county, so that they recertify us and we can continue to get those funds.
Any questions? Mr. Akers?
So Gary, on these type of things, these forfeitures, are these, there's been some in the literature that you see in the news, the forfeitures, are they actually forfeitures for the individual who's actually convicted?
It depends. State forfeiture, we typically do after a conviction. So if the funds are taken by one of our local law enforcement agencies, particularly on narcotics cases where there may be large sums of money, in those cases, as part of any plea, that money is forfeited, and then roughly, I think it's 40% goes to Oasis with the state, a portion goes to the local law enforcement agency, and then a portion comes to my office as the prosecuting agency. This particular resolution deals with the Department of Justice and money that comes primarily from Border Patrol. So in those instances, those are not cases that I prosecute. They are federal prosecutions that may lead somewhere, that may not. But the federal authorities have much greater leeway in terms of what they can seize and how they can have that forfeited, and we end up with a percentage of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None, motion carries. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Have a
Have a
good
good
day.
night.
So next up, I have a resolution recognizing January as Human Trafficking Awareness Month, moved by Mr. Akers, seconded by Mr. Reagan. Okay, any questions? All in favor? Oh, you have questions, Mr. Denisha?
I'm sure, is this a national,
The national thing.
okay,
Yep. And we, of course, have, some issues in our area, New York State, for sure. So just so everyone's aware, that's all. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None, carries. So next up, we have Vacancy Review Committee, Mrs. Doyle.
Good evening. So we have one vacancy to present to you tonight. The Vacancy Review Committee met on January 4th, considered 10 vacancies that you'll see over the month of January. One tonight, three departments at Services and 2 departments at Finance. With 5 months of data coming back through August, starting in September, we're at 94% immediate fill rate and 5% 30 days fill, and that's of 64 positions thus far. Next month, I'll bring you an update on this, the summary of the temporary positions that the board has granted continued latitude to be utilized to overlap retiring positions, fill in where there are gaps, and provide additional support to departments. Another aspect that the Vacancy Review Committee discussed this month was the potential of having an opportunity to bring in temp workers as a group in terms of clerical, for example, to public health. We've not had the luck of other departments necessarily in hiring folks. We have quite a few vacancies in public health, and the Vacancy Committee took a look at this and identified that this may be an additional tool to help staff during high volume phone times, being able to assist with their daily efforts. So that's something that you'll be hearing more about. First, the only on this agenda is a conflict defender tonight. I believe she is with us to present on the legal secretary.
Hello, how is everyone?
Good.
Good to hear. So we're asking to create and fill the legal secretary position under the criminal funding for the criminal justice Harrell Herring statewide expansion. This position would be a brand new position for my office. This would give us a second legal secretary. Right now we have one legal secretary that's fully county funded. We have one keyboard specialist under the CAFA grant that's funded under that grant. This position would be fully funded and reimbursed through the criminal funding, the salary, the fringe, and related costs for a new employee. And this would also be beneficial overall to the office and to the attorneys. As you know, you approved creating and filling a fifth attorney position for our office, which is solely dealing with criminal matters under the same funding. And this would free up time for, the other support staff to do other office work and assist the attorneys and give us attorneys an additional legal secretary, because right now we just have the one. So I'm asking to fill this position.
That's all that I have for vacancy.
All right, all in favor?
Don't have to vote on that.
Oh, no,
Nope.
okay. All right, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you, Amy. So next up is the county administrator's report.
Yep, just a few items to update the board on this evening. With regard to COVID, just as an update, our full vaccination status in the county today is 58.7. The full vaccination with a booster is at 45.9%. Public health will be hosting or supporting clinics around the county Monday through Friday over the next 3 weeks. They will be working clinics on college campuses. The booster clinics, as well as first and second doses, they'll be returning. Some of you may recall the community centers, OFA, and St. Lawrence University. They'll be returning to that cycle with the boosters available for the community in the community clinic setting. With regard to the changes that took place over the weekend and the testing that the school districts put into place, I wanted to take a snapshot today to determine the impact on the county workforce. And while we understand that that's going to continue to change, as of today, with approximations and all departments reporting, we had about 1% related to school positives that prevented employees from coming to work. So we had 10% already scheduled off. We had about 4% relative to positives, 2% in quarantine, and 5% roughly calling in sick or for other reasons, bereavement, things of that nature, but only 1% at this time reporting associated with the school testing that began over the weekend. And at this time, we also have no update on the amendment to the open meetings law that will be in place and will expire at this point on January 15th. So if we hear or we see an update to that announcement, we'll be sure to share that with the Board of Legislators. Also wanted to mention the adopted budget books are complete. Those legislators present, you will find them on your desks. Those who are attending remotely will make arrangements to get those to you. And wanted to mention the ARPA committee will convene this Wednesday afternoon. We'll send you a Zoom for the time of that meeting. Family Court Committee, I believe, is rescheduled also for Wednesday afternoon, so we'll try not overlap those two times. Last week, Legislator Akers and I met with the IDA with regard to administration and possible role for the IDA in the distribution of the funds associated with that. Also, the IDA is finalizing their report on the CEDS, which is the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, and that will be, or Comprehensive, Economic Development Strategy. The hope is they'll finalize that and we will share that with you at Finance for consideration. And unless there's questions, that's all I have for tonight.
Any questions? Mr. Akers, you're taking the lead, so you them all.
So, one of the things that the constituents have been asking for, and I've shared it in an email with you and the other legislators, was about the transparency and actually the reporting of how our COVID cases are, as far as those that are unvaccinated and those that are vaccinated. We do have reports about actually the percentage of people, which 90% of the individuals that are in the hospital are unvaccinated. But I think people are interested in actually finding out actually how many of these cases that are occurring on a daily basis, say we have 200, how many of them are actually fully vaccinated people? And I think this will help actually solve some of the division that's taking place. The whole idea that this, the pandemic of the vaccinated is no longer true, never really has been true. We know that vaccinated people are getting the cases, and many of them are. And there are primary examples in other counties that are releasing much fuller information. So the response that I got from Jolie Munger said that some of this information may not be available. Why would it be available to other counties and not us?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
We are looking right now at refreshing the data we provide in our COVID center, and I think that that will address your concern. I think that there has been some challenge between what we're able to obtain from the state site, what matches the numbers that we have, is my understanding. So I agree with you. I think if the state's providing it for other counties in New York, we should be able to provide that. And our hope is within this week, we'll be able to finalize a new look, new information on that COVID update.
So I have one of the things I may.
Yes, absolutely.
The other thing is I brought up in talking with Heather Rand at a public meeting about where we had the actual email from an individual from Tennessee that was talking about the visitation supervisor actually violating the sanctity of actually some of the processes in place that are supposed to be private. And you said that you would be investigating it. Is there any result of your investigation of what had taken place in that email?
As far as the information being shared,
I think your response was when I laid this out about the answer I got from Ms. Rand was about basically the state as a whole. And what I responded to was a specific case with specific language with a specific person.
Yep.
And that it needed to be investigated. And you said, I will. So
yes. Oh, I thought that information had been returned. I thought that information had been returned to you. Hasn't?
No.
Okay.
Nothing. So I didn't.
I believe there were some other personnel involved with how that information was shared. And I think that sometimes we aren't always in control of the folks that are working with the information provided to and from foster parents and foster children involved. I think that part was communicated in the last, but I can make sure we have a full explanation at services next week.
So the problem has been addressed is what you're telling me.
I believe that it has, and I apologize. I thought the board had received an update on that.
So I don't know if everyone had. I was aware of some of the processes that had taken place. But
Okay, we'll make sure that's fully explained with the staff that were involved.
Constituents are reading the paper and they're asking me, what was the result of that?
Okay,
So it looks like you've looked into it and it's been addressed.
yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Anyone else have any questions for the county administrator? Seeing none, we will move on to committee reports. Agriculture and Farmland Protection Board, Mr. Keisha. Thank you, sir. Alternative to Incarceration Board, Mr. Burke.
Nothing new to report.
Thank you, sir. The Board of Trustees for Supreme Court Libraries, Ms. Fiacco.
Nothing to report at this time, thank you.
Thank you. The Emergency Medical Services Advisory Board did not meet in December. Nothing new. Environmental Management Council, Ms. Terminelli.
Thank you. We did not meet in December, so we meet this Wednesday, and I will give an update at the next operations meeting.
Thank you very much. Fire Advisory Board, Mr. Denisha.
Our last meeting was canceled because we had the joint meeting at the training center.
Which we talked about.
Yeah. And the next meeting will be the 17th.
Thank you. The Inter-County Legislative Committee took December off, so there's nothing to share with that. Jury Board, Mr. Sheridan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No report, no meeting recently.
Thank you very much, sir. Planning Board, Mr. Fay.
Planning board met, there was 11 projects returned for local action, and there was one full review for basically the Stewarts and Potsdam, where they requesting a special use permit, a site plan, and a sign permit. And the board voted to approve the project with conditions and non-binding recommendations. Our next meeting will be this Thursday night.
So I had a couple telephone calls. Well, first, does anybody else have any questions? Somebody will cover it. Nothing. I had a couple phone calls about the Tim Hortons just outside of Canton, and there's something being wrong there that is being held up. Do you know anything about that?
I do not know anything about that. It's not, I believe the meeting
our last meeting, but Jason's still on, maybe tell us, to my knowledge, there's nothing that the planning board is involved. Is Jason still with us?
Yep, I just saw him pop on.
Yep.
Jason, do you know what's going on there?
I do not. I know that the county planning board did review the Valero and Tim Hortons project, the one in it's in the town of Canton, just outside the village. Boy, probably over a year ago, I would say. And it always takes a little bit of time for development, but yeah, no, I have not. I think when I've been by, progress has been pretty steady. So I'm not sure exactly what the situation might be there. I can look into it, see if I can find something out.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Anyone else have any questions? Seeing none.
Excuse me, could I,
Yeah.
Jason, could you recognize the 3 members of our board that one passed and 2 that will be no longer on the board?
Sure, if that's okay with the chair.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Legislator Fay. Yes, we did have one individual, unfortunately, passed away. A gentleman by the name of Mark Gazen from the Governor area, lived in the village of Governor, was a longtime member of the county planning board, served for a total of 33 years over about a 40-year span. He took a couple years off from serving when he moved out of the area, but a really insightful individual, and he will be missed on the board. We also had 2 other individuals, longtime planning board members, leave our ranks and are looking for replacements for the county planning board. So we're working through that process now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we move on to old and new business. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you. I've had a phone call from one of my constituents, their school, Colton. Their kids have been sent home because they had an illness, even though the day before they'd been tested and they were negative. They've been, of course, children have been sent home numerous times throughout the year. So what happened is the school called the DSS saying the kids are missing too much school. The only school they missed was when they were sent home from the school. So the DSS agent showed up, checked it all out, everything was okay. They asked, maybe you can get some documentation. They said the school won't give them documentation that they're sending them home. Check with public health. Well, to me, we've got enough COVID cases.
Yeah.
We've got enough cases in DSS. We don't need to be running things down like this. The school should be keeping better track or giving documentation so this isn't happening.
Certainly.
I don't know if anybody else has had any issues with this or not. And I know this one's specific to Colton.
Okay. We'll bring you an explanation for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other old or new business? Nicole, Ashley, Germanelli, go right ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. I just had 2 things. I know at our full board meeting, we talked about the newspaper designation, and there was going to be some conversation, and I hadn't heard from anybody. I didn't know if there had been any conversation or movement on that, just to get something permanent in place. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And then the other thing was the letter that we got from the St. Lawrence County Suicide Awareness Coalition about limiting statistics from the coroner's office from 1 time per year to 1 time per month. And I was just wondering if anybody knew anything about that, and if there was a reason for it. I know they stated HIPAA, but I'm just wondering, those statistics, especially right now, are I don't know, a little more urgent to have than once a year, I guess I would think. And I'm sure that there's data reporting and grants.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Ruth will look into that. Anyone else have any old or new business? Seeing none, do we have a need for executive session?
We do for litigation.
Okay. Can I have a motion to go into executive session? Mr. Akers, seconded by Mr. Fay. We are now in executive session.
Give us just a moment to go offline. And we have masks for everyone here to take. They are not the KN95s. They are the KN90s, which go behind your head.
Oh,
So
nice.
there's-
Oh, we're back on. Okay. Ms. Terminelli, you had a question too.
I did. Just a quick question for point of information. I know that Public Health in St. Lawrence County, we've adjusted the isolation and quarantine times to 5 days. As of today, though, are the schools still fall under the 10-day? Is that correct?
I can tell you that the 10-day should be changing in the next 24 hours. The Department of Health has come out with guidance.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
No one else has any other questions?
Adjourn.
Adjourn, seconded by Mr. Akers. We are adjourned.
Pick up your masks, take your budget books. I'll get Nicole's things for you, Rita.
I'll grab those.
I think so. There's, I'll go
I think there
grab
was one
some.
earlier,
I'll go grab one.
2 weeks back.
Oh, okay.
Like quarter after 6.
Mr.